Hi. My name is Isla Whitmore. I am 22 years old. I had just returned from Millie's grave. The fresh flowers still smelled faintly of lilies and rain-soaked soil. Her memory lingered in every corner of the garden I'd walked through, every breeze brushing my hair. And then I opened her bedroom door. Movers were unloading boxes. My mother-in-law, smiling far too sweetly, said, "It's for Lily's baby." I paused, letting the words sink in. Lily. Baby. I knew exactly what she was hinting at, the inheritance, the house, the control. I smiled softly. Not cruelly. Calmly. Calculated. Funny, I said quietly, stepping further into the room. Did he tell you about his vasectomy? The air shifted. Every polite smile, every well-practiced expression faltered. Because here's the truth. I own this house. Not just legally. Not just financially. But strategically, patiently, quietly, while they all assumed I was powerless, grieving, forgotten. And now, standing in Millie's old room, I realized something beautifully simple. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The vase on the mantelpiece caught the light. A symbol. Of control. Of legacy. Of everything they thought they had. And for the first time in years, the balance had shifted. I was no longer the quiet one. I was the storm waiting patiently behind a smile. The movers finished placing the last boxes, and the room fell silent. My mother-in-law hovered, adjusting her pearls nervously. "I thought you'd want to see the nursery plans," she said, voice high-pitched, practiced. I smiled lightly, letting the pause stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Nursery plans," I repeated softly. "Funny, because I don't recall being consulted about any of this." Her smile faltered. My husband, standing behind her, shifted uneasily. For once, he had no confident retort. I walked slowly toward the window, letting my fingers trail along Millie's old desk. Every object told a story of what they assumed they controlled: inheritance, decisions, power. All of it mine, quietly, irrevocably mine. "You see," I said, turning to them, calm, measured, letting the words land. "I've been patient. I've let you think grief made me weak. But patience is a weapon. And timing decides who wins." My mother-in-law's face tightened. "Isla, this isn't." "It is," I said. "Simple. Firm. Truthful." I held their gazes, unflinching, as if daring them to challenge me. For the first time, the room felt the shift. The air was mine. The power was mine. The house? Already mine. And tonight, they were going to learn something they should have realized years ago. Underestimating me was their first mistake. And now, their world would change quietly, elegantly, irreversibly. I let the room breathe for a moment, letting my mother-in-law squirm in polite silence. My husband glanced at me, unsure, a flicker of respect and fear in his eyes. "Do you really think you can just move things around and decide everything?" she finally asked. I smiled softly, calm, almost serene. "Oh, I don't think. I know." I walked over to the mantelpiece, picking up the small vase that had once belonged to Millie. I turned it in my hands slowly, letting the sunlight catch its edges. "This," I said, my voice measured, "is just a symbol. A reminder. Of control. Of ownership. And of the consequences for assuming someone powerless is powerless." I let that hang. The tension thickened. Every carefully constructed smile, every polite gesture from them, began to crack. "You see," I continued, "I've done my homework. I know the timelines, the finances, the permits, the agreements. And I've acted quietly, efficiently, without a sound." Moments passed. My mother-in-law's mouth opened, closed. My husband's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing," she whispered finally. I set the vase back down with precision. "No bluffing. Facts. Timing. Patience. Skills you underestimated. That's why I'm standing here, calmly, while you're wondering how it all slipped through your fingers." I could see it in their eyes. Disbelief, tension, shame. They realized, finally, that grief had not made me weak. It had made me invisible. And invisibility is a powerful weapon when wielded correctly. Tonight, the lesson would begin. Not with shouting. Not with chaos. But with quiet, deliberate, unshakable control. And by the end, they would understand that the girl they overlooked was untouchable. By the next morning, The shift was already underway. I had quietly reviewed every document, every contract, every clause that touched this house, this property, this legacy. Every loophole, every oversight they thought irrelevant, was now in my hands. When my husband entered the room, hoping to smooth over tension, I didn't look up immediately. I let him stand there, uncertain, the reality sinking in. "You changed the locks," he said finally, voice tight. I turned, calm, collected. "I did. And I changed the safe codes. And the digital access. Just a precaution." His face paled. My mother-in-law's expression was somewhere between shock and horror. "You can't," she began. I raised a finger, gently. "I can. Because this house, this property, this inheritance, has always been mine to protect. And I've waited until the timing was perfect." The first domino had fallen. Every move they had assumed was their control, inheritance plans, renovations, baby preparations, now required my approval. Every decision they thought they had already made was suddenly frozen in uncertainty. Silence filled the room. Thick, suffocating, undeniable. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Calm observation was far more devastating than anger. They realized, slowly, painfully, that the quiet girl they had ignored, dismissed, underestimated, had already won. And tonight, the next domino would fall. By late afternoon, I had moved on to the next step. The movers had finished, but I hadn't just let things sit. I had reordered every item in the house, every document, every plan relating to Lily's baby preparations. When my mother-in-law peeked into the nursery, she froze. "It's different," she stammered. I smiled, calm, unshaken. "Yes. Because I decided what happens here. Not him. Not you. Not anyone." My husband tried to interject, but I stopped him gently with a raised hand. "Do you see? Control isn't loud. It isn't frantic. It's precise. It's patient. And timing decides everything." They both looked at me now, finally realizing the extent of their miscalculation. Every plan they had executed, every assumption they had made about this house, their power, their influence, it was all under my command. And yet, I remained calm, elegant, unrushed, the quietest storm they could imagine. Tonight, when the final documents arrive, they would understand fully. Ownership isn't about signing papers recklessly. It's about strategy, precision, patience. And for once, they were on the losing side. The dominoes were falling faster now, and the family they thought they controlled would watch helplessly as the consequences unfolded. By evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet for my mother-in-law's taste. She paced nervously while my husband stood frozen by the doorway. I had one final task for the night: make sure everything, every detail, every document, every key, every code, was unmistakably under my control. The safe? Reset. The digital access? Updated. The inheritance papers? Reviewed, verified, ironclad. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. They were watching me carefully now, like prey recognizing a predator. "Isla," my husband said, voice trembling, "this is a lot." I smiled lightly, calm, elegant. "It's not a lot. It's simple. Ownership. Timing. Precision. You've assumed control for years. I've simply taken it back. Quietly. Efficiently. Completely." My mother-in-law finally lost composure. "But this is outrageous." I tilted my head, soft, unflinching. "It's fair. Because you assumed I wouldn't act. That I'd stay quiet. That grief or patience made me powerless. And now." I let the pause linger, letting them feel the weight of the shift. The house, the inheritance, the decisions, they are mine. All mine. And tonight, you understand exactly what that means. They realized, fully, finally, that nothing they had assumed about power, control, or influence applied anymore. The quietest moves, the patient strategies, the careful timing, had delivered absolute dominance. And tomorrow? The dominoes would fall publicly, irreversibly. By the next morning, the effects of my moves were impossible to ignore. The news had arrived. Headlines circulated. Whitmore Estate under new management. Isla Whitmore secures full control. Young heiress takes ownership of family legacy with strategic precision. My mother-in-law's calls went unanswered. My husband's texts were left unread. Every attempt to intervene, to argue, to manipulate, failed. Investors, lawyers, and property managers all recognized one truth: the estate was no longer theirs to influence. I walked through Millie's old room calmly, sunlight falling across the furniture. The house hummed with quiet order, my order. Every box, every plan, every digital access point reflected my control, my strategy, my patience. Mom finally spoke through a shaky voice message. "Isla, we didn't realize." I smiled softly, sipping my tea. Not because I wanted validation. Not because I needed it. But because the lesson had landed. Power, respect, control, isn't given. It's earned quietly, strategically, and irrevocably. By evening, even neighbors and family friends whispered. The realization was spreading. The quiet girl who had been overlooked, ignored, underestimated, was untouchable. And tonight, the first dominoes outside the walls of the house had fallen. By nightfall, the house was calm. The estate, once a battlefield of whispers and assumptions, now reflected one undeniable truth: I was in charge. My mother-in-law had stopped pacing. My husband had stopped pleading. Even my father-in-law, who had tried to mediate from afar, realized he was powerless against careful strategy and patience. I poured myself a glass of wine, sitting in Millie's room, the room that had once been a symbol of grief. Now it was a symbol of control, foresight, and quiet dominance. I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I didn't humiliate. I simply held space, let the facts speak, let time work its course. They realized what they had ignored for years: grief, patience, quiet observation. All are weapons when wielded correctly. The house, the inheritance, the decisions, every detail was firmly mine. And the subtle, relentless pressure of careful moves had taught them a lesson they couldn't forget. Sometimes, the storm doesn't roar. Sometimes, it waits. And when it moves, nothing can stop it. I leaned back, calm, victorious. The girl they underestimated had become the woman they feared. And as the lights of the estate reflected in the quiet night, I understood fully. Power isn't about loud declarations. It's about precision, patience, and timing. And tonight, the quiet storm had won.